Now, what's happening is that we have the very last operation on the launch vehicle, which will progressively become totally autonomous from the ground systems.
This is what basically happens during the synchronized sequence. From the 7 minutes down to liftoff is power. Am I right in saying power passes from the ground control over to autonomous onboard computer control?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that is what's happening now. If we bring the camera back into Jupiter, you'll see people starting to wander out onto the terraces. There they are. They're going out. There are two terraces on either side of us here, observation decks, and the VIPs and invited guests go out there usually about this time, and they have a bird's eye view of the launcher lifting off, passing right over our heads on her way. The DDO will call out the 1 minute mark in just a moment, and we'll be into the final 60 seconds of Flight 200.
Le DDO. Attention pour H0 moins 1 minute. Top H0 moins 1 minute.
All right, we're into the final 60 seconds of the first launch of the year. Remember, you can follow all the action on the website. You have the address right there. The ignition sequence, tell us about that, Alex. You'll hear the DDO call out allumage,
yes,
ignition.
You'll see the flame under the main engine, Vulcan. So we shall ignite the engine and check it for 7 seconds.
That's the main engine.
That's the main engine. And when everything's fine and with the check is okay, then the ignition of the boosters and the actual liftoff.
Okay, so you get main engine lights up first, computers check out for 7 seconds, all the pressure, testing it on the ground, and then the boosters go. We'll let the DDO, we'll call out the final countdown, and be back after Ariane has cleared the tower.
À tous de DDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité. Top, allumage Vulcain. Confirmé. Top, allumage EAP, décollage. Les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
Beautiful there. Ariane off on her way with just a 24-hour delay, leaving a trail of gold as she rises into the sky over French Guiana at 18:51 local time and right on time. Ariane began her mission.
And right on time. So we had a mass at liftoff of 773 tons, including 554 tons for the sole boosters. The boosters which give a very strong initial acceleration that will increase velocity from 0 to 7,200 kilometers per hour in about 2.3 minutes. That's 4,500 miles per hour. So after booster separation, which will occur in about 2 minutes, the launcher will have lost about 75% of its liftoff mass. The boosters will fall down into the Atlantic Ocean in a zone which has been secured by an international advice to maritime navigation.
Ariane burning now 5 tons of fuel per second. That's 2.5 tons in each booster per second. The EPC, also the core stage, as it's called, is burning another 300 kilos of fuel per second. All that adds up to roughly the equivalent of a dozen Airbuses. She's now following the program in the onboard computer, which gives all the orders, including stage separations, which we will soon see. 4 powered flight phases tonight. We're in the first one, the main engine, and the boosters, as Alex said, they're going to burn for another maybe 20 seconds. Alex, take a look on the left, the upper left screen. Can you give us a description of the curve, please?
Yeah, we see the simulated flight trajectory, which is computed by using very accurate mathematical models of the launcher and the ATV, and by application, of course, of the Keplerian laws for the ballistic phase.
Which we're going to hear about a little later.
Yeah, a little later.
All 3 of them.
So the Mach, which follows...
DDO has just called out the separation of the boosters. You can see what that looks like. There's another one out of camera range on the left, but they fall back down right on time at about 64 kilometers up, I think. They fall away from the shore. People streaming back in from the terraces, you can see in the background there.
That's now to follow the actual flight. And now we're expecting the fairing separation.
That's the next milestone.
Minutes.
can see the cursor crawling up on the upper left. I don't know if you can read it. SEPQUAF, it says, separation of the fairing. On the lower left, Alex, can you describe what the bottom lines are?
Yes, we have the real-time information from the launcher of the velocity and the altitude, and also the angle of the telemetry antenna with respect to horizontal.
So you see the altitude. The altitude is 102 kilometers. That's the second line. So we're above the atmosphere, which is where we can separate the fairing, and the DDO will call out that milestone in a moment. We are in the second.
Largage de la coiffe.
There it is. Largage.
There it is. So we don't need the protection of the fairing anymore. We have crossed the atmospheric layers, and then now we don't need this 2 tons weight anymore.
There are actually two halves. One half, like one of the boosters before, was out of.
Yeah, it's cut vertically and horizontally.
Everything is perfect on board, says the DDO. The ATV now under the fairing, exposed to the elements. And we're going to go now to the next part of the broadcast, which is the latest news from Arianespace, and there is a lot of it. So take a look. Ariane ended 2010 in style with its 6th successful launch on December 29th, delivering 2 telecommunication satellites, Hispasat-1E for Spain and KoreaSat-6 for South Korea. It was the 41st straight successful mission for the European launch vehicle. 2010 was a big year for Arianespace, with 12 contracts signed for Ariane and 7 for Soyuz. In all, 6 successful launches for a total of 12 satellites. 2011 promises to be as big, with Soyuz and Vega bringing their launch services to the space base. Tokyo, January 19th. During the EJBRT roundtable of Japanese and European industrialists, Jean-Yves Le Gall met with Japan's Prime Minister, Naoto Kan. The meeting underscored strengthening cooperation between Europe and Japan in matters of space research and in commercial space. Eutelsat has signed with Arianespace to launch one of its new satellites in 2012. This is the 26th contract between the two partners. Jean-Yves Le Gall and Dr. Volker Liebig of the European Space Agency also signed for launch of Sentinel-1A, an environmental monitoring satellite, for December of next year. Baikonur, January 28th. The Soyuz once again successfully lifted off from the Kazakhstan base. It was launch number 1,766 of the legendary vehicle. Meanwhile, here in French Guiana, Soyuz is preparing for her maiden voyage.
This is Mission Control Houston with an update on the situation. The crew on board the International Space Station, Commander Scott Kelly of Expedition 26, calling down to spacecraft communicator Rick Sturko. He had a tally-ho on the ATV-2 launch from the launch complex at Kourou, French Guiana. So far, everything looking very good as launch proceeds on track right now. We're so far 5 minutes and 55 seconds into the launch. We should have seen a rocket fairing separation of the ATV-2 by this point. And the next activity on the timeline is the main cryogenic stage's engine cutoff coming up here at 3:59 p.m. and 47 seconds. Just a few seconds from now. Following that will be the upper stage ignition of the second stage at 4 p.m. Central Time. And then that will burn for about 8 minutes and 12 seconds until it cuts off. All systems looking really good on the ATV-2 launch, and the International Space Station had a bird's eye view of that. In addition to the flight control team here, we have a couple of operations leads from the Houston Support Group at the Launch Control Center in Toulouse, France. Michael Way is the HSG Ops lead, and Ed Guevara is the HSG Automated Rendezvous Specialist, who are watching from the control center in Toulouse as the flight control team continues to monitor the progress of ATV-2 and its 7 tons of cargo headed toward the International Space Station at a fast clip.
The control center in Toulouse made contact with the ATV-2. Then separation can occur. On its own, the ATV will circle the Earth for a week before catching up with the space station 22,000 kilometers ahead of it. It'll then have reached an altitude of 350 kilometers and be ready to dock. You heard Alexei in the film talking about the Santa Maria ground station. That's an ESA tracking station, rather new one, joined the system in 2008. Not used a lot, but it was used for ESA's Envisat, which was launched by Ariane in 2002, Flight 145, and it's going to be used also to receive launcher telemetry for the upcoming Galileo GPS launches on Ariane or Soyuz from the space station. The DDO has just called out the extinction of the lower stage and the separation of the lower stage. You can see what that looks like up there.
Waiting for the ignition of the upper stage.
The first upper stage burn. There it is. He's called it out.
There it is.
Those are three commands given by the onboard computer: extinction of the lower stage, separation of the lower stage, ignition upper stage in about 12 or 13 seconds. Now this is the everything normal. He says the first ignition will burn for about 8 minutes. There are actually 3 burns. 2 of them concern the ATV. 1 of them does not. It comes about an hour after our broadcast. I don't think we're going to be here. But the lower composite has done its work now. The launcher reaching its targeted position for extinction of the main engine. Everything okay on board?
Yes, the EPS. The EPS is burning. It's used on this ES version for its capability to be reignited during the flight, and then to perform the 2 boosts which are necessary for the ATV mission before a third one, which will be the re-entry into the atmosphere and destruction of the upper stage, leaving no debris in space. But now we are listening to Jean-Jacques Dordain, Director General of ESA.
Johannes Kepler is the second ATV. Jules Verne was the first one. It was a great achievement. But this one is a production ATV, which makes a big difference, since it's the first of 4 to leave over a 1-year period. It's an exceptional and unique vehicle for ESA, because it's partly a launcher, a spacecraft, partly an orbiting infrastructure. And even though it's an automatic vehicle, it's compatible with a crewed infrastructure. It's also a unique vehicle for the station because it's the heaviest truck bringing freight on board and which automatically docks with the station with great accuracy. It's the outcome of a tremendous work undertaken in industry all over Europe under the leadership of Astrium in Bremen for the production part. It's also cooperation with partners, since we need all the partners of the station, especially the Russian partner, since we dock with the Russian part of the station. And indeed, it's also the outcome of the continuous support of all the member states. And I'd like to thank them all for their support and their patience for this exceptional event.
6 minutes left in the upper stage's first burn. Ariane performing flawlessly. You can see on the bottom left our altitude is 146 kilometers and our speed is 7.2 kilometers per second. Johannes Kepler, Alex, he gave his name to the mission tonight. Tell us a little bit about him.
He was born in 1571 in Germany. He's a contemporary of Nicolaus Copernicus and Tycho Brahe. He's a German mathematician, astronomer, and astrologer, and a key figure of the 17th century scientific revolution. He has already proved himself at the age of 28 as being a superb mathematician and earned a reputation as a skillful astrologer as well.
And we're going to have a look at his 3 basic laws coming up. That's coming up a little bit later on. For now, another film on the ATV, a look about